Let's come back to our specialist on the phone, Dr. Burlinova, head of creative diplomacy about Russian public democracy in Russia, on the situation and the implication on the wider sense. Dr. Burlinova, what do you think of the EU position here? The European Union and the NATO have shown a very strong sense of unity, standing next to each other, voicing condemnation in unison and slapping the strongest ever sanctions on Russia. Do you think they are sensible in going further down this road? Because the eastward expansion of NATO from very early on has been warned by Russia to be a very dangerous thing for Russia, and has been warned by generations of US politicians to be a great error.
Yes, I would say that their position was rather predictable. In some aspects, the EU position is even harder and tougher, and much more emotional, I would say, especially such players as Poland, Lithuania, Latvia. They play now the first role in this emotional attitude towards the conflict, and it's very understandable. So yes, we can hear very strong statements on behalf of the German Chancellor, but I can't imagine how we stop economic relations between Germany and Russia, because these are the greatest partners, economic partners inside the EU. So inside the EU, Germany and Russia on the other side. So I do hope that these negotiations will start in the nearest future. I mean, the negotiations, the so-called Minsk III process, and maybe this will prevent all the sides from further escalation of this economic fight.
How do you foresee the kind of support that Ukraine has received from the European Union and from the United States? For instance, of course, very strong sanctions being slapped, but no troops, definitely no troops, nor from NATO, nor from the United States. How do you, and the Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has said that the West has abandoned Ukraine. Help us understand the kind of support that the West has given to Ukraine.
Well, I should agree with President Zelenskyy here. The West abandoned Ukraine, and this is the biggest disappointment for the Ukrainian side. And yes, a lot of words of support, but no troops as they expected. But on the other hand, it was very naive to expect that NATO starts fighting against Russia because of the Donetsk conflict and this general conflict. So it's a kind of exaggeration to think so. Our Ukrainian partners, they are very emotional, and they always believe in something bigger than it happens. So this is a big disappointment for them, and this is a good sign for Russia that NATO is not going to fight with Russia because of Ukraine, because this still gives us a hope for a very reasonable and good approach to the situation.
Dr. Burlinova, now that we're talking about the help Ukraine has been getting, Zelenskyy obviously says there has been not enough help from the West or from neighboring countries when it comes to this crisis. I am interested in that scenario you just pictured for us. If this military campaign continues, obviously, given the fact that Ukraine is outnumbered in both weapons and personnel compared to Russia, its military will not be able to defend a much mightier Russian force. Will Zelenskyy be forced to take up the scenario you just mentioned? I mean, with all that resistance he has put on, it's hard to imagine that he will cave in to the pressure and to a possible failure on the battleground here and just agree with Russia's security demands and agree to not join NATO forever.
want to be clear here because I think that it is Zelenskyy who have the biggest responsibility for what has happened to Ukraine, because he had a lot of chances to agree with Vladimir Putin about our bilateral relations, about Donetsk, Donbass, about NATO, and all these questions. The only thing which he needed is to talk to Vladimir Putin directly and to talk to the leaders of even so-called DNR and LNR. So even if they were not recognized by anybody, better to talk than war. Now he is the biggest loser in this situation. He is elected president. He is a president of Ukraine still. So if we start negotiations with him because he was elected president, official president of Ukraine. I'm not sure about his future. I think that his future is very poor. I mean, as a politician, as a new leader. You see, the problem with Ukraine that they have a lot of politicians, and none of these politicians is not ready to take the full responsibility for the country. This is the biggest problem.
Can I jump in here? I'm really interested in adding one question here. You said Zelenskyy is the biggest loser here. Who is the biggest winner?
Oh, nobody. There's no winners in this situation, because if you think that Russia is so happy and Russians are happy to fight Russian troops are happy to fight against our Ukrainian brothers, it is an exaggeration, and this is not true. You know, a lot of Russians have relatives in Ukraine. I have relatives there. So it's a very personal conflict, very bloody conflict. But the situation is was so dangerous these days that it resulted in this war.
Dr. Burlinova, first of all, hopefully your family remains safe in Ukraine, but I want to get back to the economy and the impact of sanctions, because these are some very strong sanctions. In terms of if we see the sanctions get ratcheted up a notch, what is that going to mean for the Russian economy? I mean, from 2014 until now, it actually seems the sanctions have made the Russian economy more resilient. Yes, it's hurt the Russian economy, but there's a strong sense of resiliency. I mean, Russia's now using less U.S. dollars. We are seeing the balance sheet stronger, external fiscal balances all stronger.
Well, I hope that we will be resilient, because I think that when such decisions are taken, they are taken under the circumstances when we can fight, we can stand against sanctions. Well, I think that our leadership understands very well, and while taking these decisions, they understand very well about the consequences of this decision. Yes, the Russian economy is stronger than it was in 2014, but of course these sanctions will be very painful for us. I wouldn't say that it is not true that they are painful. We'll see. I hope, as all people here, despite of all the military results and operations, that negotiations will start soon, because all the sides need these negotiations and new agreements about our further living.
Yeah. Dr. Burlinova, I have to ask you about this, because the world is wondering whether or not indeed the West will cut Russia off from SWIFT, the global interbank payments platform. How high of a probability is that? I know right now Europe is not for this option, the United States a bit more so. What is the likelihood of Russia being cut off from SWIFT, and what kind of alternatives does Russia have?
Well, I think it's too early to discuss this alternative. I still hope that Russian government has this alternative. I'm not so familiar with the economic details, probably, but as I understand, this is the last measure which the Western countries would like to take, because it will hurt both sides.
Yeah.
Both sides.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Many thanks for your thoughts on all of this, Dr. Natalia Burlinova, Head of Creative Diplomacy.
Thank you.